Just if I could start with you, and this is starting as a conversation, but please do be very useful to hear how you see this, and maybe then I can come to you, Andrew, both to respond to what Irene has said and to add your comments on what you've heard today. We have one microphone, so the microphone and power go to you.
It's shared. Okay, thank you.
Talking stick.
Hi everyone. Well, thank you for inviting me, and I am sorry that I wasn't able to join you earlier. But today was the day when I was required to speak at a number of events. So, and it is about partnership. This morning I was with the Angel Association, so equity providers to start-up and early stage businesses. Because one of the most important things for the banking sector, and it has been a theme I can see across today, is connecting that finance landscape. There is actually a lot of supply of finance for households, businesses, etc., but is it as well connected as it could be? And we are very much of the opinion that it can be better connected, that banks aren't the panacea for everything. Equity is important, and that comes from angel finance, it comes from venture capitalists, it also comes from the New Business Growth Fund, which in fact the banks have established. It also comes from the community finance sector. It was great to hear Nick speak. I mean, 200 million capital for big society capital, of course, does come from the banking industry. So the key thing is, how do we get that deployed into the market? A number of the banks are working very closely with the CDFA and a number of the CDFIs in relation to both scaling the sector, whether it be from European type programs, what those institutions do directly, like the co-op with Unity Trust, or RBS in terms of the risk management frameworks that have been worked on with the CDFA. So there is a very big focus for us on working with the community sector and working across the financial services sector and making sure that's connected. I was struck by the last comments about the business bank. I really see this as a real opportunity to jointly work on policy. And why do we say that? Well, one thing that we are looking at is we're engaged at the moment in a pilot of how, if a customer comes, a business customer, not right for bank finance, how we refer that onto the community development finance institutions. But imagine if the business bank could act as a clearing exchange. Any finance provider not able to provide the finance that a business comes forward to could actually be referred centrally to the business bank. And the business bank, recognising where that business, for example, is based, what area it's based in, what type of finance it's looking for, could actually look at the range of finance providers in that local community and act as an independent referral mechanism into that. Now, we're looking very closely at that because we believe that is how you create some of the connections that we've spoken about. And the receivers could be community finance, peer-to-peer, equity finance providers, but that's something we think the business bank can play a key role in. I do believe it will have a range of finance options in it. It will bring together existing government schemes, and some of those are grants. The Regional Growth Fund is a grant scheme. Separately, you have the Business Finance Partnership. Separately to that, you have what Capital for Enterprise offer, and a number of the community investment CDFIs actually have access to the Enterprise Finance Guarantee. So I think there will be a range of finance options. I think what we collectively need to look at is there a proposition where the business bank as well can be utilised in placing capital through and flow through into the CDFIs, and we're actively looking at that. So we think there's a lot of opportunity, and we're ready to work in that regard. And I think it is about how we jointly work on the policy interventions, as well as how we jointly work out how best we connect the landscape.
Thank you very much. Andrew.
So for those of you that haven't known me very long, my first job in the UK was to set up a charity that would lend money to not-for-profit organizations in urban areas of poverty, which is where I came to this hippie think tank in Worry Commercial Road. And my sponsor was NatWest. And they continued to be my sponsor. John Gummer launched the fund, so this was under the Conservatives, and it was about, enterprise and wealth creation in disadvantaged areas. It was also about the fact that a few people that were community activists had been to the States and seen the CRA and thought it might apply over here. And Lord Alexander, who was the chairman of the bank, said, well, let's take some money and see if we can do this. What I didn't discover until about a year and a half in, that of course it was a public affairs stunt to say we're doing something and you should give us credit for doing something about this issue. So I sort of think, Dan, from the Bank of America, you're very seductive and slightly dangerous, actually, in terms of the messages that you were giving. But we would love to get there. The reality is that after a few years, New Labour came into power and literally started talking about social exclusion and then financial exclusion. And then this guy does a deal with Oxfam, which talks about the fact that 33% of the British public are unbanked. And he persuaded me to put some sponsorship in it, and then the headline in the Times was, according to research sponsored by NatWest, 33% of the public are unbanked. I had a very uncomfortable time for a while. This lot over here, the VBA, they paid for some research, which some months later came out and the headline went, oh phew, it's only 6%. And then you had this balls-aching, excruciating argument, which was a complete distraction. The fact is that in a society where credit is really important, a consumer society, in a society where enterprise is really important, that people who should get credit should get it. And whether it's 6% or 33%, actually when you went to the... So I took some of my senior bankers to an estate in Hull, and we did a qualitative survey, and it's actually 40% on that estate. So how you cut the numbers, there's a problem, right? And in terms of connecting lots of supply, actually there's a lot of people that would disagree, and through many iterations, the DTI, I remember Mervyn Podelty, great guy from the co-op, setting up saying co-op will lend to any proposition, that's viable and has a good business plan. And then all the other bankers said, oh, that's true with us as well. We've got plenty of supply. We just need good quality propositions. Sometime later, it was a CDFA conference, and a very senior banker said, actually, the problem with the credit crunch isn't irresponsible lending, it's irresponsible borrowing. And this was at a conference of CDFIs, and the shock in the room was incredible. So as someone who then came and left the CDFI sector and went into work for the bank to try and find a way whether we could, effectively become like Dan and create a portfolio of mission-driven financial intermediaries that were supporting things we wouldn't naturally do. What was very interesting was, what's the business case for that? Is it because of reputational risk? Is it because of fear of regulation? What is it? And your point was, lots of supply, how do we connect it better? Well, just because I don't think there's an argument to be won here with this audience, I think we kind of know what needs to happen, but I think that it is about, and the guy, Bruce Davis, this morning talked about power. There is an issue, and the issue is that actually, if your business is about, providing shareholders with a return, and in order to do that, you need to have volume business that's very profitable. Your whole motivation and instinct is going to take you away from the types of markets that we're talking about, actually that are broken. There is a market failure, and thanks to GHK, for giving us the evidence that people denied before. And there's also a public sector failure in this area. I think the second point is that the remuneration of people like me, I came into the bank to work in the small business bit. The variable remuneration is entirely determined by how much business I can do. It takes time to take an unbankable proposition and turn it into something that has some prospect of repaying. So it takes application. And I'm not sure where that sits in any of the institutions that we currently have. So not only does there need to be a professional interest, but I think there also needs to be a personal interest from the individuals whose job it is to do this. And what we discovered was that not only is there a lack of understanding about poverty in Britain, but perhaps, dare I say this is really harsh, a significant absence of compassion. And I'm a trustee of the Len Kelly Chase Foundation, and we've decided to put 5% of our £120 million endowment into a range of social investment vehicles. And we got a dividend check back from one of our lenders that we've invested in. First of all, the trustees freaked out. They thought, well, hang on a minute. How can we be making money out of these people? They're doing good. So there's sort of cultural barriers to some of this stuff. And then they sent us effectively, and this is your economic return, this is the check, but here's the social return. And the average borrower from this CDFI is a young woman under 25 who has 2 children, who is on benefit living in social housing and uses the money to pay for things for her kids. This is not a loan that a bank would easily give to that type of person. So that's for personal lending. For whether it's micro-lending to ex-offenders who want to get into self-employment. There's a whole, you can sort of see, this isn't business that naturally is hunted for from a traditional large financial institution. This is, I said at the beginning, and even though there was a bit of a pop at the efficiency of banks, I think that they do get a lot of credit to a lot of places very efficiently. But what we're talking about is something that's actually quite small, and there is a lack of professional and personal interest in trying to create means. And I think what is required clearly is what we've agreed by the end of the meeting, is more transparency, more information about where credit does flow, and to the places it should and doesn't easily, then we work on the solutions. I think the reality is it does cost to do this. It costs in development terms. In community development, you call it outreach. You know, people use the word marketing. How do you get to people who are marginalized and very far from conventional markets? And so in reacting to how we connect, I think if we don't accept that there is a problem, then, and you can't get cross-party support for the fact that there's a problem, you won't really necessarily get a solution. CCLA has 40,000 charity clients, and we manage money for them. And you know what most of them do? They either give grants or they accept grants to do their good work. And it seems to me that the grant is a pretty blunt object, and it only delivers something that actually by definition is unsustainable. And one of the things that social investment does, community development finance does, is it changes the paradigm and creates some very interesting solutions, because you start to have a very different conversation with the organization that wants the credit, and about how are you going to pay it back, how viable are you, how sustainable are you, and then you have a more honest conversation about how you would apply subsidy, whether that's taxpayers' money, grant money, or you actually can leverage it from the mainstream capitalist markets. And so, I mean, basically what we're finding is that there's a lot of frustration. Grants aren't enough, but they'd prefer it over loan, to be honest. But there's a huge amount of excitement as well about the possibilities, and everyone looks abroad and says, couldn't we have some of that over here? And I don't know any other way to connect the institution I used to work for, which became RBS, to the organizations that are members of the CDFA without some compulsion.
Thank you very much. I wanted to ask a question, which I'll ask of the two of you, but I'm also going to throw it out as well. One thing which hasn't really come up today is around business advice and support, the sort of investment readiness side of it. But we're talking about finance going in where there's a whole set of things that need to be in place. Collaboration, entrepreneurship, kind of a customer. There's a set of things there, but the business advice side is a very difficult one to talk about because it's so varied. But in the cost structure that was talked about, where Dan was talking about the kind of the standard of sustainability, business advice was excluded. That would be either under the operational costs of an intermediary or provided by somebody else, or paid for by the business. So it just seems to me that it's been one of those things, and we've had a very, very wide-ranging discussion, but it's one of those things that hasn't kind of raised it. So I'd be interested in your comments on that. I mean, I can't, and you'll forgive me for, I mean, the CRA is not the centrepiece of the Community Investment Coalition, but actually there's a broad agenda that's there. But given that it's come up so strongly, more this afternoon and this morning, I can't help but ask you around, to the elements of that. There was talk about, well, actually you need to rebrand this because it feels like a stick. Is there any merit in that? Mark was talking earlier, Nick was talking earlier about transparency as an element, and then also about the idea of an affirmative obligation, citing kind of Ronnie Cohen's work in relation to the early venture capital side. Maybe I could ask you about business advice, those ideas of transparency or kind of rebranding rather than having a fight over the CRA, having less of a fight anyway. And Andrew, I don't know whether you have ideas. Could that idea of affirmative obligations, does it have a role to play? It comes out of equal opportunity legislation in ways. Could you imagine that as a tool more widely? And sorry to say, if you have got any questions or comments that you'd like to throw in, please do start thinking about them, because after this round I'm going to come out to the floor.
Let me take the transparency point first, because I think it's important that everyone in this room knows what the banks are already doing in relation to transparency. We are going to be producing this year the lending statistics across this country at postcode level, and that will shortly be published in relation to 120 plus postcodes. And we're also, up until 2010, there was a deprived area data set that was published by the banking community. We're asked to refocus that to the 120 postcodes, which we're now producing, and then there will be, on top of that, a deprived area provision of data. And actually, when you do comparisons across what is actually provided in the States vis-a-vis what is going to be provided here, actually that level of transparency will be very detailed, in fact. And so that does pick up the point about you will then be able to see very clearly where provision from the banking sector is going into this country. We already provide regional statistics and sectoral statistics. And that will inform policy, for sure. And we're very open to that. The second part of what I talked about, that exchange, well, imagine if you have a business bank that is acting as a clearing exchange. The wealth of information that will come through that will really allow the targeting of policy to where the need is and where the requirement is. I'm not suggesting in the supply at the community side that there is everything available today. I am saying in the range of supply of finance in this country today, whether it be through equity providers, angel finance, venture capitalists, etc., there is a very vast array of different types of sources of finance. Your point about the business finance advice piece is, I think there are two angles to that. One is, as a business, and let's just focus on the business side, are you sure, and there's a knowledge there, of what the types of finance are and what's right at the right time? Equity finance is a very good way for starting up a business in terms of looking at what the opportunities are from angel finances. In growing a business, looking to buy assets, asset-backed finance has its place, and there are many asset-backed finances. And I think there is a role to play across the financial advisory space, and in the banks there are a lot of advice that's given, but also there's a mentoring program that we have nationally, and I know many of you run mentoring programs, as many yet universities do as well, of really making sure businesses are able to understand what is available, what's the right type of finance at the right time, and the investment readiness piece of how do I then present myself to anyone who I might seek finance from. The accountants have established for the first time a business finance advisory accreditation. That is going nationally this year. Already the ICAW provide an hour of free advice up and down the country under their business advice program. The banks have established a national mentoring program working with businesses. Tim's been here all day. That's 1,000 bank mentors working with mentoring organisations up and down the country and with businesses up and down the country. That's proving successful, and we've connected the overall mentoring landscape through mentorsme.co.uk. We do need to encourage, and I hear it from family business owners, people that are involved with family businesses, and generally encouraging people. And one colleague yesterday from the CBI, who actually chairs a small business panel, was making the comment that if you look at the Olympics, we were all quite happy to hear the athletes who won talk about their coach, their therapist, their physiotherapist, etc. As a business, at times seeking a mentor or advice feels like you're in trouble. Yeah, we've got to change some of the cultural aspects in this country as well. And I think that was a very valid point. And it's not wrong to bring people in to support you, and it's not wrong to look for support and bring things in. So I think that's a broad-ranging piece there. But I would say I do believe the banking industry is doing a lot more to be transparent. I'm sorry, Andrew, you feel that RBS haven't perhaps engaged as much, but what I see in RBS is that they are very engaged in this space, and they're working very closely with a number of partners in this space. So maybe your time there did create some influence in due course.
I haven't been at RBS for 6 or 7 years, but I sit on their microfinance fund, which is a charity. I don't know if Eric's still here. But I sit on their microfinance fund, which we set up, and we basically used underspend to wholesale money into CDFIs, evergreen, nil interest. But it's not easy work to do, and it seems very difficult to get £5 million to invest in these types of markets, when it's very easy to get £25 million to go into a sort of a high growth wealth creation.
But it's still, they're doing a lot, I think.
Okay. So I think business support is really critical. I think that the plethora of enterprise agencies, business links, there's been just over the last 20 years, massive amount of resource going out through the DTI to provide support. But if you just look through the literature, what you'll see is that the Social Enterprise Coalition, now Social Enterprise UK, and others have really struggled to translate that to make it appropriate, because you can deal with training up people, giving them the skills, the experience to deal with operational risks, technical risks, but the difficult thing is that a lot of the businesses that are socially directed have a much broader interpretation of what the job is to be done. And so, if you're in regeneration finance and you're a big business or housing finance, and you're taking advantage of what used to be English Partnerships, now it's part of the Homes and Communities Agencies, to shore up the type of mainstream lending you wouldn't do without that kind of subsidy and government-supported development agency, because there are policy objectives that are going to come out of that. You would see your job generally as just financing the lands, the land, the bricks, the mortar, and less so about the people and changing lives. And it's that aspect, about why one's in business, and that if you just see it as transactional and not transformational, actually it's got to be something more, and it's more than just the narrative. I think I totally welcome the data that's coming. Is it disaggregated by bank, or is it just going to be?
We are working on firstly aggregated, and then we will looking at what will be disaggregated. And what we have to do in that regard, as you will appreciate, is manage between data protection to customers, competition legislation, OFT legislation. But they are seeking to. It will be aggregated first, because we want to get that out in the first 6 months. And then we'll be looking at what the disaggregation might be.
Because the reason I asked the question is because I was when RBS was taken over. When NatWest was taken over by RBS, this conversation was being had already with Gordon Brown and the banks about it, and Ed was very much involved in his previous life. And all the banks were sending information to the BBA, who would then send it to the Bank of England, what they used to have as a domestic finance unit. And so this exercise already happened. When Fred realized that RBS plus NatWest equals I'm going to be at the top of the leaderboard, he was really happy to disclose his lending in every postal code, but the industry decided in the end to pull back. And what they were shocked at was in some of the most deprived communities, there were actually great business opportunities that they didn't even realize that they had. So going back to Dan's presentation, actually, there is money to be made in areas that are perceived and if people could sort of be educated where those opportunities are and how to put them together, then I think business support is important. I think the other thing that no one's really said, so Mark probably more than hinted at today, the other reality is that the CDFI sector themselves need a lot of professionalism and business support. But it's a bit unfair to slag them off too much, because where are they going to get the resources to be able to do that? So I'll just put that on the table as well.
Thank you very much. Well, thank you very much. Actually, you both reminded me of a note that I had from the organisers to thank RBS for its sponsorship of the research work that was done earlier and presented by Nick Henry, which showed very, very clear evidence of some of the market gaps that are there. And it certainly means, but actually one of the frustrations in this field is that there are banks who have done have taken steps in this field. I mean, you think of Barclays, for example,
Yeah,
in
exactly.
the early days on disclosure. And then you've got those that don't, you know, and actually they're kind of obvious by not being named, but actually in some ways there's no point really kind of aiming criticisms at those that are engaging. And it'd be really interesting to think about how do we encourage a context in which, you know, this is seen to be good practice, you know, by others. I don't need to come back to you on that, Joe, because I'm not here to put you on defensive.
No, but I just want to say, I mean, the others are involved in the HSBC, the Co-op, Lloyds are all involved in a range of support initiatives, the CDFI referral programme that I've spoken to you about as well. So, I mean, there is a lot more movement in terms of how...
Well, Co-op are wonderful, and do move your money, please, to the Co-op.
but the
HSBC
I do have a conflict of interest.
But the HSBC and Lloyds and others are very involved in social...
I would love to have seen kind of HSBC and Santander.
Well, they are. Santander and HSBC are part of the CDFI referral programme.
Very, very glad to hear it. Good regard. And I do have my fabulous helper, Louis.
Who's broken the microphone, so I'm going to have to
You
steal
have
yours.
That's fine.
Yeah.
You're in charge there. That's just good.
Okay, I'm going to start somewhere. You've got over here, no? Right, can we start with Ben?
I know I'm involved in the coalition, so I'm not sure, Ed, if I'm allowed to ask a question. But this, I think, Irene, is directed probably more at you, not in any way to put you on the spot, but I think to reflect on a lot of the discussions today which have indirectly been around a sort of CRA type idea. I don't think that would work in a local context, but I think we do need something, and you and I have talked often about the need to create a much more coherent policy framework. We both, albeit from different perspectives, battle with departmental interests across government. And I guess I was just interested in your take from a bank perspective about how best you think we could create a more coherent policy framework.
I'm afraid I'm also an ex-banker, so sorry, Irene, because I have a huge respect for you, but there's nothing like a reformed banker because it's a bit like a reformed smoker. I have a lot of questions that I look back on I was a business lender for about 15 years, and I had a great relationship with my business lending unit because I was very proud at the time that I never sent up a case that was declined. I look back now and feel hugely guilty about the number of businesses that maybe I didn't fight for or push for, but I was very popular, hit maximum targets. My question really, I know that you're looking at declined business loans and then referring them over. I would ask why the banks can't put something closer to the front of their website that says if you're not getting what you need from your business bank, there are other places to go. It's not about directing business away from the banks. What I'm saying is that there are a lot of very, very busy business bankers out there who, if they don't think they've got a chance of getting it through, don't spend any time on a lot of cases. There's a lot of businesses that think they wouldn't get the loan agreed, so they don't ask. So your figures about declined business banking type loans and what people are out there seeing as being able to actually get out of banks are so widely different because of I'm afraid to say an awful lot of very busy bankers. The other thing I would ask is that if you're going to be breaking down lending by postcode, and I don't think that you have to worry about Data Protection Act because you're not talking about individual customers, but there's a lot of information that was done around BAL ratings and capital ratings. I'd like to also understand what type of lending you're doing by postcode and what type of risk banks are actually taking in terms of business lending.
I didn't hear the last. Can you just repeat that last one?
It was really around the fact, the type of lending, and really just around the fact that banks are doing sort of the very safest lending, the easiest lending, and I'd like to understand the types of lending. There's a lot of information within banks around information you have to do about capital stats and whatever. So I just think there's an awful lot that could be really useful information, because what it would actually do for CDFIs, for organisations who want to step into that space, is it would show where there's real gaps, that really is useful information. and I'm afraid I disagree. I think you do need a CRA type of act in this country to make the banks do more than tokenism. Individually, bankers really want to do more. I know you have shareholder pressure and other issues at the moment.
Just keep going.
I'm Penny Shepherd from the UK Sustainable Investment and Finance Association. It's probably a question particularly to Andrew. The discussion today has been very much within what you might describe as the banking paradigm, and yet there is an increasing interest in the role of institutional investors and encouraging institutional investors to get involved with business lending. What I'm very conscious of is that there are obligations on that to be a market rate type involvement, and that at the end of the day it's about the pensions of postmen and dustbin collectors and so on. But what role do you potentially see for institutional investors in this space? Particularly in the case of local government pension funds, is the Public Services Social Value Act potentially, has that got potential to play a role in relation to the procurement of investment services?
It's just a very quick question about the disaggregating of the post-COVID data. Are you talking to colleagues in America? Obviously, we've got some people here who could speak to the American banking experience, because there must be a way for banks in America under the CRA to be able to disclose disaggregated data without harming consumer protection issues. So I just wonder whether you're in contact with them about that, and that might be a way, because I do think that issue is absolutely vital in order to really use that data to see what's going on and to have a sense of responsibility that people can and it's not a question of pointing fingers, it's about finding out where the opportunities are. But I think clearly they've been able to get around that particular issue, and it is an issue, but if they've got around it in America, there must be a way for us to get around it here.
Sorry, Michael Norton. Three things I just want to mention. First is the challenge of faith groups, which are cohesive and have a common bond, and how they may be mobilized to generate more community finance. The second relates to mobilizing savings. In today's world, the traditional finance landscape offers us pretty well zero return after inflation, negative returns. And yet there are people out there who would like to invest, loan or save with alternative social, community and ethical finance institutions and recipients. So how can we mobilize more savings and make those of us who would like to get away from the banks, make it easier for us to find places to put our money? And the third thing is, Ed talked about business advice, and Irene talked about lack of recipients for social finance. I think that one of the challenges is to get more social enterprises investment ready, and to, in my experience, one of the biggest challenges is not business advice, but business modelling, to structure them so that they are investable in a sustainable way. And I'd just like to mention initiatives that we've developed, which is the International Centre for Social Franchising, and the possibility that franchising might offer to create more social enterprises that are investable.
Pat Conti, New Economics Foundation. This is a question for Ed. Co-ops UK has been very successful in promoting and working with others to develop community share issues. Have you given much thought to the development of community bonds, which are developing in Canada, the United States, and also, of course, Mark talked about the CDFI fund and the community bonds. So comment about that, because I think the issue might be with the FSA. And secondly, of course, we've been talking about the United States and what we can learn from America, but we haven't really talked much about Europe. And Europe has these wonderful mutual guarantee societies for complementing public guarantee funds with mutual guarantee funds, which avoid moral hazard because the small businesses actually invest in the mutual guarantee funds. And I know you've been talking to the FSA because they were banned in the 1990s when we developed them here by the major government. What's the FSA's views on that opportunity now? Because they exist in most EU countries.
Kelly, you're naturally coming back. Thank you very much indeed. So can I just go through the panel? If I was to advise you, I would advise you not to go into the detail of disclosure, because I think to some extent if people are that interested, they'd probably grab you afterwards. But it's going to be easier for you to kind of demonstrate rather than talk through column by column. I'm hugely sympathetic on the competition issue. I mean, I know we're talking about this for 10 years, so we ought to have solved it. But any businesses coming together know that the competition authorities are looking straight over their shoulder. As I said, maybe we've had time to sort it, but I'm sympathetic.
Well, I was just going to add, yes, of course, we're looking at the US piece, but we've got the EU to contend with as well, so we actually have a regulatory UK and EU environment. Let me debate policy framework. The reality is we have to work together now, I think, on the critical things that we need to push for in this next budget. Because the reality is we're talking about a coalition that is going to get very heavily into political national election time very shortly. So if I was really focusing on what is it we have to do and do immediately, and we've talked about how does this sector get capitalised, how does it get access to some of the interventions that we know are coming, like the business bank, I think we have to work on what we know is coming or available today and how we push through those initiatives, like the one we also talked about recently with Heard and Fallon on what could we do on the EU side. So I think we've got to really focus this immediacy on to get capital, funds through, etc., on what are those key areas, and do that collectively, because that's really going to give you the money in the base, etc., for some of the things that we need to do. And we have a window of opportunity, I think, with this coalition government, and I don't think that's necessarily a long window. So my view would be let's focus on some really key issues now. And I'm not I think there is a lot happening in the broader aspect of transparency. There's an awful lot of research gone into perceptions versus discrimination. I mean, some of the CRA Act came in because of the view there was discrimination in the States. That is not proven here. So let's focus more on what are the policy interventions that are going to make a difference now to the scaling up of the sector and the access to finance. So that would be my reaction to that. To the lady that's an ex-banker, and I used to work at Standard Chartered, so there's lots of things they do in social enterprise overseas. On the declines process, I mean, let me be clear that banks and the industry has got a series of initiatives to support business that is industry-wide now. If a business customer is declined, it has the right to appeal to the bank to have that re-looked at by a separate area of the bank. Also, within that decline process is the right to be referred to a CDFI and have a mentor support them through the next stage of review of what else other opportunities might there be out there. We've also created something that's called businessfinanceforyou.co.uk, Buffy we like to call it for short. That is going to be deployed at all of the front lines so that they are able, and this is all on the bank's website, that says if we're not right for finance, these are the other areas that you can look at. And we have that in the BBA environment. So Business Finance for You, Better Business Finance, and mentortome.co.uk all exist on the bank site and indeed ours. And we're doing a lot of programs up and down the country to try and get that message out into the community. One of the other areas that we want to work on, Ben and us, we've talked about, is the LEPs. They have a role to play in all of this. They need a framework of operation. And this budget, they're going to be looking at what's the single pot that becomes accessible potentially through the LEP route. Well, how do we make sure the LEPs are connected into the community finance environment in their local environment to connect that up? So there's a lot to be done there. On regulation, I mean, I love it. I mean, I'm sure lots of bankers would like it to be the environment they operated in many years ago. But the regulation, whether it be the Office for Fair Trading, whether it be capital, liquidity, risk weighting requirements, how it's all has just escalated upwards. And of course that makes it much more of they must lend to a viable business, it must be proven to be a viable business. And sometimes the regulatory parameters, one of the key areas of issue at the moment is affordability. A bank has to assess where a customer can pay back. Many of the declines, and Russell Griggs oversees the appeals process, come from that aspect of affordability. Can the business afford to pay it back against the regulatory parameters the banks have to adhere to? We are looking at whether there is an intervention on serviceability, affordability, that would be applicable across the place. So lots of things being tried to be done there. So those are sort of two of the key things I think I was asked. I'll pass to you, Andrew.
Yeah, sure. On coherent policy about all this stuff, it's never going to happen. I mean, the reality is every step forward in encouraging the development of CDFIs in the UK has had disagreement, opposition, everything's been contested all the way through. And sometimes that's with partners that you would even think that would be your friends. So for example, the National Federation of Enterprise Agencies, filled with bankers, semi-retired, doing great work in an old paradigm, saying we don't need a CDFA because actually you've got us. And you know, you had the NCBO saying you don't need a social enterprise coalition because you've got us and it's just charity by another name. So the reality is there is no harmony here. There's going to be constant disagreement, and it's about marshalling the argument, but it's also about using your power. And I think Michael Norton's point about how do you get the common good to come together to argue the case. Great, and there's a great opportunity going into the next election to make sure that in the manifestos there's just little pieces of ground that can be gained as they're all looking to curry favor with the voters. On the second point about declined loans, when I started doing my CDFI work, we weren't allowed to do a loan unless the punter came along with a letter of decline from a bank. How empowering is that? So, you know, there is this thing about civil servants not wanting to create displacement in the market. Well, actually that's another way of exerting the existing people that are already there that own the land, their power to say we don't want displacement in the market. The banking commission that's on at the moment, Baroness Kramer and the Bishop of Durham and Andrew Tyree, they're all very interested in how they encourage more competition. You know, there is a very positive way to look at this. If you know, the Bruce's contribution this morning was, you know, actually we're just getting on and doing this, and if we can, people want to buy our products and it's legal and it's successful, then maybe a bit like fair trade in the UK, you know, it leapfrogs. And you know, when I came to the UK in 1993, who would have thunk Marks and Spencer's would be selling and marketing in the way they are now to the middle classes? For Penny on the pension funds, so I sat in, can't remember which committee room was it, when we had Clive Betts saying, from a kind of academic point of view, we could take an infinitesimal sliver of local government pension money and put it into impact investment. And the theoretical case was unbelievably compelling. And then you had a guy who is the chairman of the West Yorkshire Pension Fund, who is involved with PERC, who's scrappy little bearded, no, oh gosh. He used to be the leader of the council at Bradford, Labour. He stood up and said, over my dead body, will none of the money, because let me describe to you who are the beneficiaries of the money that's in our pension funds. And he basically talked about the fact that these are incredibly low-paid people who will eke out their old age from very low-paid jobs that they had in the first place with no savings. This will probably be the only, apart from what the state can give them, income to get by. And then he said, and when he dies, his wife will maybe benefit from the rest of what's left until she dies, and it's going to be an incredibly low income, and he threw out some stats. It's all you lot that think that you can put pension fund money into this social investment lark. You're all affluent middle class people who think, yes, it sounds good, it makes me feel good about stuff. And he he then went on to sort of talk about the fact that he said, if you can show me a social impact vehicle that'll pay me the kind of yield I need to be able to do the job that this fund needs to do for these old people, then we'll consider it seriously. But I haven't seen one yet, and they're all startups, and I don't want to put these people's nest egg at risk through all this socially good stuff. And then he said, and even if you can win me over, you're going to have the trade unions to fight. So this is not an easy argument to win. It's very, very complex. And yet theoretically, Clark Betts laid out exactly why it should be able to be done. On the, one more thing about the point about savings. I mean, I thought it was very interesting. Irene said earlier about the small business bank, that if mainstream clearing banks, if the customer isn't right for them, not right for, then maybe we can send them to the new small business bank. The thing that people sort of forget once they put their money into the bank, that actually it's the UK's money in the first place, you know, and to set up intermediaries to go and do things that the banks can't do because of their pursuit of profit or income-based segmentation, which blinds them to the types of customers you guys work with. You know, actually, it would just cost everybody a lot less if there could be a Dan, you know, in every financial institution with a team of 12 people who go out with resource and a mandate that you don't have to fight for every year for budget. Just the whole thing would speed up. It would just be so much easier.
Okay, it's my role. Oh, I first have to answer the question, Pat. Thank you for that. I hope you've agreed that I've faithfully chaired today without telling you everything about what's going on in the cooperative sector. Is all very exciting, but you asked me a question, so I'll be able to respond. Community Shares is the raising of equity capital for community enterprises, and it's an incredibly exciting and growing field. We're working with locality, linked in very much to the asset transfer and the community rights agenda at the Department for Communities and Local Government. And what we're seeing is there's a whole new generation of cooperatives emerging by asking people to take responsibility by investing in safeguarding, and it may be the village shop, it may be the kind of a pub, it may be the local bookshop, as Michael Morpurgo has recently kind of invested in. So that field of community shares is growing fast, and I think what you're talking about, Pat, there in terms of the bottle of bonds is one that I think we need to open up the menu of options that are there. We have had some examples, cooperative bakeries that have had bread bonds, so you get repaid in bread. How good is that? Shared interest as well, that have done kind of microcredit bonds as well. So I think we are interested in learning, and my colleague Simon Borkin at the back is scribbling furiously as you were writing. Cooperative guarantees I have no time to talk about, except to say that these are a model found in every European country except the UK. They've been responsible for 70 billion euros of SME finance, and 8% of all small businesses across Europe, continental Europe, have been financed through these cooperative and mutual guarantee societies. We are working with the Financial Services Authority, or the Financial Conduct Agency as it will be, and the Bank of England, and in discussion at the moment actually in relation to the British Business Bank around how we can encourage banks and others into this sort of field of innovation in SME finance. Come and talk to me afterwards if you're interested, very live. So, in conclusion, can I thank you very much for your participation today. You took a risk in coming because we're all busy people. We've got businesses to run, we've got things to do. But we came together because actually we're ambitious for what we do, and we know that we can't do it alone. We need to do that together, not just those in the room, but also those outside of the room as well. We need not just one magic bullet, but we need a range of interventions. We need to be demanding of others that they take responsibility. We need to be demanding of ourselves that we accept responsibility as well. So on behalf of the organisers of this, can I thank you for coming. I know that actually things are going to move with some momentum coming out of this. This was not, as I say, an academic seminar. This is the start of people organising. Listen out for it, you can hear that sound. And so there will be contact, and I'll be in touch with you over the coming weeks and months as this agenda moves forward. And I want to pay tribute to the 4 organisations that have helped to make this happen. Now, he opened the conference, he's going to close the conference on time, I'm pleased to say. We can finance a more just and sustainable society if we can get meetings to end on time. I passionately believe that. But he started the conference, and I go back to our host for today, Andrew Robinson from CCLA.
Okay, so on your tables you have a little grid, so just grab one of those. This is just to make you, I want you to sort of maybe carry this around for a bit. I've called it a tool for people who care, and I made this up to sort of explain a development of a bank who has gone from denying you can do any of this stuff to doing quite a bit. I'm being rude about RBS and NatWest, but actually they're doing quite a bit, and all the banks, most of them are doing quite a bit. The question is, how much are they really doing, and how much of it is just sort of CSR tarted up or whatever. So here's a little tool for you, okay? So you look across the top, it's got the response phase. So are the mainstream banks that you guys engage with, including the co-op actually, are they being reactive to the issues that you're concerned about and we've been talking about today? Are they receptive? Are they constructive? Or are they being proactive? You might even include the big society capital institution on this little journey, okay? And then if you go down to where the focus of attention is, who the main actors are, and what the driving philosophy is. If I take my experience, when I started out working in the UK, the banks were against. But then when government and prime ministers and chancellors got exercised about the issue, they became engaged and reacted. So first column. They created a situation where the focus of attention was end of pipe, not in the institution, outside of the bank, a pilot project. The main actors was a specialist. They couldn't find any in the bank, so they hired a wacky Canadian who was a bit inexperienced and naive, and gave him a fixed-term contract to go and set this thing up. It's very much a specialist. And the driving philosophy of my executive sponsor was to minimize the damage that might come from this kind of stuff and the potential threat of things from over the Atlantic Ocean. So that was where they were. They clearly moved on over a number of years because the default rate of these funds were very low indeed. And they became much more receptive. And they started to set up a process. They appointed managers. They brought me in from the cold, from being on secondment on a fixed-term contract to full-time staff sitting in the small business bit of the bank. And they said, okay, well, this isn't about minimizing the damage here. It's about making the best that we can. So we have to do this. Let's optimize it for the institution. This is where I think a lot of the banks have stopped, but I think that RBS has moved on to being more constructive. So did Barclays on the consumer finance stuff, and so on. Constructive, maybe product development. They take a sector approach. Certainly community and social enterprise is much more interesting to financial institutions now than it ever has been. And they put a lot of energy into BME, small businesses, women entrepreneurs, and so on. And so you can sort of see that you've gone from minimization to optimization to the bottom, acceleration. And this is where I think the whole thing is sort of variable and patchy. Where we're not at yet, and we'd like to be, if you want to end the note on sort of an inspirational point, is we'd love to see mainstream financial institutions with the clever people, the resources, the data, the information, their monopoly power, not cartel, certainly not, to be applied in a proactive way where the systems are in place to work well with big society capital, the Green Bank, the Small Business Bank, and CDFIs, where society, going back to Michael Norton's point, is engaged in holding the financial institutions to account. We underwrite and are paying for the stuff there and will be doing for years to come. And there's some sense of vision about what we want to achieve. And what I want to finish is, when I was at the CDFA conference, I offered everyone in the room a £1,000 prize. And the £1,000, and I'm offering it to you today, because not one of the people at the conference ever wrote to me to apply for it. So here's the deal. Some people think that all the CDFI social enterprise stuff is utopian thinking, all right? Now there is a guy whose name is Professor Jim Dater, and he is at the University of Hawaii. And every semester for the last 12 years at the University of Hawaii's Department of Political Science, Professor Jim Dater asks his student in an introductory futuristics class to undertake an assignment. And this is your assignment if you wish to have a go. In 15 to 25 typewritten pages, You are to design, and this is what he asks his students, so instead of the specific, you could have maybe talk about financial institution or CDFI. He asked them to design in 15 to 25 pages the best possible, as in not the best possible, but the best, and it's possible to achieve it, real society that they can imagine. So instead of real society, I would talk about what we've been talking about today in there. That you can imagine for a real place. So it might be City Save Credit Union Birmingham, I don't know. You have to state in the 15 to 25 pages the goals, the behaviors, the conditions, and how you would operationalize those goals, what the alternative institutions might be that you would work with, considering all forms of technology that came up today. I mean, Penny Shepherd, she once told me, I don't know what all this CRA stuff's anyway. If we could just get Vodafone to apply itself, we could change it. It's kicking me. Here we go, last sentence. And how that existing institutions would need to adapt in order to get on. So 15 to 25 pages, if you send it to me, and I'm going to say that going back to the pre-days before the Social Investment Task Force, Ed Mayo, Penny Shepherd, we will be the judges of the best, and the best one that sends it in. And if you're the only one, we'll just send you the £1,000. You can't have it for your personal use, you must invest it in a CDFI. Okay? Thank you very much for coming.